So there's another book that I wanted to share with the community. This one is by Dr. Irvin Korr and Rene McGovern, Living Long and Loving It, Achieving a Healthy and Active Lifestyle. So this is actually a book that Dr. Korr, of the famous facilitated segment concept and many other discoveries, that Dr. Korr wrote this book from the 80s into the 90s about healthy aging. He lived to be 94, was very active until the end of his life, as they talk about in the book here. And Rene McGovern was tasked years after his death with taking his unfinished manuscript, which was discovered, and turning it into this book, which was published in 2008. So it's quite good. You can find it on Abe Books, like Abe Lincoln, ABE, for $5, something like that, $5 including shipping. So it's pretty much free. It's good. I haven't read all of it yet, but I've really enjoyed it so far. There's such a nice, clean transmission of this wonderful man in his writing. There's a whole bunch of these little quotes that he has at the start of all the chapters, and I'll read some of them after reading the excerpts here, but they're just great. And so there's kind of two reasons that I want to share this with the community. Number one being just that I think it's wonderful to get a little closer look into Dr. Korr's personal life. The section I'm going to read you is a little bit of his autobiography and the way that osteopathy changed his life. But just through that story, it's a really nice, almost like a case study in transformation through osteopathy and how Dr. Korr took it and just really ran with it. And had a profound shift in his being. So at first I'll read you Rene McGovern's introduction to the book, and then we'll get into that little biography with Dr. Korr. But the other reason that I wanted to share this book with the community is that A.T. Still actually in his writings discussed using osteopathy specifically as a means of achieving longevity. I pulled out one little quote here I'll read for you. Turn the waters of life loose at the brain, remove all hindrances and the work will be done, and give us the eternal legacy, longevity. Still in another instance, stated that a primary goal of osteopathy was to procrastinate death. So basically what Still was pointing to when discussing this topic was that osteopathy could be used as a primary means to add years to your life, but also life to your years. And I really think that this is a concept that is often neglected within modern osteopathic education. I know it was within mine. And I don't see it discussed, I feel, enough within the in-person and online osteopathic community that I'm in touch with, that people can profoundly benefit, that we as practitioners as well can profoundly benefit from consistent and regular treatment, despite potentially the absence of symptoms. One of these quotes that Dr. Korr has in here is that health is the best defense against disease. And I really feel that osteopathy holds so much potential in this regard. And so I just wanted to share that with the community and perhaps spur some thinking in that regard, some discussion in that regard. So here we go. Let's jump into Rene McGovern's introduction to the book. At no time in the past has healthy aging been more critical. With the demographics of aging descending upon us and the federal deficit looming, healthcare resources are becoming scarcer for those who cannot afford them. Medical education has been trying to gear up for the impending storm, but it may not be enough. Years ago, in a tiny village in the Midwest, a physician and son of an itinerant minister began searching for the sources of good health. It was with that man's legacy that Irvin Kim Korr discovered a secret to aging well. It was his intention to share that secret with the world in this book. Kim Korr was trained as a physiologist at Princeton University at a time when a doctoral degree was the purview of only the extremely bright and privileged. Dr. Korr was both. After securing an academic position at New York University, the influence of World War II and the communist threat sent Dr. Korr to a little town in the Midwest, Kirksville, Missouri, to find out what was going on there. The secret to aging well that he found there was osteopathy, and it would change Dr. Korr's life forever. His hope, before he died, was that this book will do the same for you. I met Kim Korr only once, in 1998 at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs during the annual meeting of the American Academy of Osteopathy, AAO. He was 89 years old and had the youthful vigor I had come to expect from people in the osteopathic profession. Let me explain. During my first visit to Kirksville, when my husband had his final interview before becoming president of the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, or KCOM, the founding college of osteopathic medicine, I saw there was something special about the people who lived there. They had a youthful vitality, a sparkle in their eyes, and a pep in their even gait. I did not really know what osteopathic medicine was at that time, but I remember saying to myself that my husband and I would grow old well if we chose to move there. We did choose to move, said goodbye to our life in the city, and left Case Western Reserve University for Kirksville in 1997. It was in 1998, as I was beginning a qualitative research study comparing doctors of osteopathy, DOs, and allopathic physicians, MDs, that my husband and I went to our first academy meeting. It just so happened that Dr. Korr was giving a keynote address at the meeting, and we were scheduled to have lunch with him and his wife, Jan, after the talk. I had already heard of his reputation as a rigorous researcher, the best the field had known, and as an exacting professor of physiology. Many a KCOM alumni had talked about struggling with his course, but said so with great respect. I was excited to be meeting one of the many legends of the osteopathic profession. When we traveled to state conventions, we frequently heard stories that featured Kim Korr, Max Gudensson, and Duke Snyder. I had come to know those names well. Nearly 8 years after our memorable 3-hour lunch with Kim and Jan Korr, the head of the Still National Osteopathic Museum, Jason Haxton, called me with a request to complete a manuscript on healthy aging by Dr. Korr that had been found in the archives. My mind went back in time to our afternoon together and to the great respect that DOs had for Dr. Korr's research. In addition, since our meeting in 1998, my knowledge and training in aging, as well as my immersion in osteopathic research and philosophy, had expanded. Therefore, I was excited on both an intellectual and a personal level about completing the manuscript. I was also honored that Jan Korr would entrust the manuscript to me. My contribution to this book has been threefold. First, along with help from A.T. Still University and the Still National Osteopathic Museum, we converted the manuscript from the archives into a living document. Dr. Korr began this book in the 1980s. The copy we had needed to be put into electronic format and updated. Luckily, Dr. Korr's concepts were ahead of his time. His research had always been cutting edge, and he did not limit his thinking. Second, I needed to couch his ideas within the extensive work on aging that had been done since he put the manuscript to rest in the 1990s. Finally, I worked to assure that the voice you hear will be Dr. Korr's throughout this book, as he tells his story of healthful aging. He apologizes frequently, not wanting to appear less than humble. He is a teacher par excellence. Through the interweaving of his stories with his ideas, he teaches profound principles for health as well as provides physiological and neurophysiological knowledge that will change how you think and behave. After working with this manuscript for 2 years, I feel as if I have been tutored by one of the best teachers of the 20th century. As much as I believed that I understood my own fields of aging and of health psychology, Dr. Korr's synthesis of his own research and application to the laboratory of his own life made some of the messiness of my own understanding elegantly clear. I invite you to allow this master teacher to mentor you, and I hope you embrace this book. Dr. Korr has interwoven 4 themes. Primarily, the book serves as a guide on how to achieve successful aging. As a physiologist, an award-winning medical educator, and a respected scientist, Dr. Korr has illustrated key principles by utilizing his personal experiences to make them meaningful and easily understood. The foundation of his insights and his life transformation are based on an integration of the principles of osteopathy developed by A.T. Still and the training in physiology Dr. Korr received at Princeton University. Well versed in the knowledge of his time, Dr. Korr immersed himself in osteopathy and was transformed by it. His research on the principles of osteopathy was ahead of its time and has been supported by current research in psychoneuroimmunology. It is both his fundamental knowledge and the process of transformation that Dr. Korr wished to share with the world as his legacy before he died. Unfortunately, Dr. Korr died at the age of 94 and was unable to complete this project. Therefore, it is my great privilege to act as midwife to his legacy, along with his widow, Jan Korr. Dr. Korr hoped to import other key themes regarding his personal transformation through osteopathy. He had a deep understanding of the evolutional influences of biology, the capacity of the self-healing physician within, the unity of the body, mind, and spirit, the notion of commitment and personal responsibility in achieving and maintaining health, and the value of osteopathic treatments and other types of musculoskeletal activity. At times, he plays down osteopathy because he did not want to preach, but throughout the book one can see its influence on his life-changing journey. I will include in the epilogue a brief history of osteopathy, a brief review of the current status of evidence for osteopathic manipulative therapy, and a further integration of Dr. Korr's ideas in my field of aging and health psychology. I will also offer additional resources for those who would like more in-depth knowledge, and I will share how one might find an osteopath in both the United States and most other countries of the world. I hesitate to say more lest I prevent you from meeting the real author and beginning your life-changing journey towards healthy aging. Rene McGovern. So I'm going to skip the introduction here and go straight to part 1, Metamorphosis. Here's one of those lovely quotes by Dr. Korr. My earlier fear of death, could it have been a disguised fear of life? Chapter 1, What is your secret? Here's another quote. Having spent most of my life seeking, being given, and discovering countless and diverse answers, only recently have I begun to discover life's most fruitful questions. During the past 25 years or so, I learned to expect a surprised response from persons who had just discovered my age. You sure don't look or act that old. What's your secret? For most of those years, I received the question as an implied compliment, to which I usually responded in feigned modesty with some flippant acknowledgement that turned off further inquiry. As I passed into my middle and then late 70s, the question, what is your secret, became more frequent and insistent. Clearly, people really wanted to know how a person as old as I could appear to be so much more youthful than they thought could or should be expected. What, they wanted to know, accounted for the phenomenon of a person born in 1909 who remained unbent, flat-bellied, agile, and vigorous, and was still fully engaged professionally, with continually widening interests, who was still athletically active, and who was still living as enthusiastically as in any previous period, and perhaps even more so. Family history. What, then, is the secret of my good fortune? It is certainly not evident in my family history. As a small child, I was aware of the frailty of my father, who, in my 5th or 6th year, was sent away to a tuberculosis sanatorium for a year following a near-fatal hemorrhage of the lungs. Throughout the rest of his short life, he suffered from impaired circulation in the legs, which made walking difficult and painful. He was also the victim of assorted allergies and recurrent infections. My father died in early middle age of coronary thrombosis, as had both of his parents. As I write this, I am saddened that I have no memory of his having played with me as a child, or of my paternal grandparents, who died in my first year of life. While the maternal side of my family was blessed with longer, less impaired lives, nevertheless hypertension and hyperthyroidism were chronic problems for my mother, and her brother. In addition, there were breast tumors, 1 fatal brain tumor, and 2 deaths due to congestive heart failure. My first 40 years. Until I left my family home at age 23 to complete my graduate studies at Princeton University, physical complaints and chronic illness were so much a part of my daily environment that I grew up with the unconscious conviction that ill health and early death by heart attack were also my destiny. Every skipped heartbeat, palpitation, or stitch in the rib cage reinforced that expectation. Athletic activity, toward which I already felt little inclination, was easily shunned for being hazardous to my survival. I lived cautiously and conservatively, avoiding unnecessary exertion in order to save my energies for necessary tasks. No wonder I was dubbed a precocious hypochondriac. I recall an incident in my 25th year when I found myself jubilantly dashing up the stairs of the university biology building to announce to fellow graduate students that I had just passed my final oral examination for the PhD degree. I halted in mid-flight, reminding myself that I was no longer as young as I used to be, and that the beginning of my professional career was no time to precipitate a heart attack. I completed the climb to the 3rd floor at a stately, life-preserving pace. Upon completing my work for the doctorate and an additional year of postdoctoral fellow, I joined the faculty of the New York University School of Medicine in 1936. In 1942, I took a leave of absence to conduct research for the War Department until the war's end in 1945. Then aged 36, I viewed myself as middle-aged and headed for the inevitable decline. I continued to live my cautious life, reserving my energy for my work and my family in the hope of gaining some additional time. In the fall of 1945, I accepted an appointment as professor and chairman of the Department of Physiology at the Kirksville College of Osteopathy and Surgery, currently Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, a part of A.T. Still University, in Kirksville, Missouri. The founding of the college in 1892 marks the founding of osteopathy as a reform movement in medicine. Today there are 26 colleges of osteopathic medicine. I intended to stay only a year, but what I found there was so challenging that I soon made a long-term commitment. I remained until my first retirement, 30 years later. What I found so challenging and exciting at my new position were perspectives of health and disease that I had not previously encountered, either as a patient or as a member of a medical faculty. I found myself puzzled and intellectually challenged by the emphasis on the care of the total person and not merely the affected organ, function, or symptom, on the body's own healing power, on the partnership of patient and physician in nurturing that power, and on the role of the musculoskeletal system in health and disease. It was not, however, until 5 years later, when I was 41 years old, that these perspectives began to have personal as well as academic meaning for me, and that my lifelong assumptions about my own health and early demise were challenged for the very first time. The beginning of the second 40-year period. One morning in the fall of 1950, as I ended a physiology lecture, I was approached at the podium by a recently appointed faculty physician. He introduced himself as Dr. John Chase, and without preliminaries offered me his clinical services. At that time, fees were not an issue since free healthcare in the clinics and hospital of the college was available to all faculty and staff. Startled by his proposal, I asked, "Why? I'm not sick." "No," he responded. "You may not be sick yet with a nameable disease, but you're not very well either." What a startling idea. While observing and listening to physicians for many years, both as a patient and colleague, I had unquestioningly accepted the conventional premise, unarticulated but eloquently expressed in practice, that everyone is in either of two states. We are either sick or well. Further, only the sick are eligible for health care, since the well have nothing to cure. Not only had the phrase, "not very well," implied to me a concept of gradations or degrees of health, but Dr. Chase was, in effect, offering me an option I did not know I had. He was offering me the chance to upgrade my health. I asked what had led him to such an unfavorable assessment of my health. He imitated perfectly my habit of leaning on the lectern throughout my lectures. He described my labored breathing, shoulders visibly rising and falling with each breath, my frequent sighing, the gradual fading of my voice and the change in my pallor, and the resulting collapse into my office chair after each lecture. "Of course," I protested. "I pour a lot of energy into my lectures." "Not that much," he said with a faint smile. Entirely on the basis of his observations of my posture and the way I moved, he was even able to describe in detail my severe right-sided headaches and backaches. By way of explanation, he pointed to the almost fixed tilt of my head to the right, due to contracted muscles, and the compensatory curve in the lower back that brought my eyes level. How could I not be impressed by his observations and by their interpretation? I accepted, with some uncertainty, Dr. Chase's caring offer. After all, what did I have to lose? My first and longest visit to Dr. Chase's office was devoted entirely to a physical examination performed not only by himself, but by internists on the clinical staff, as well as X-ray and lab technicians. In addition to diagnostic procedures in common use in those days, Dr. Chase performed a palpatory survey of my entire body with his hands, assessing muscular tensions and tissue textures in every area, prodding for sites of tenderness that he seemed to locate with remarkable precision, and testing for ease and range of motion of virtually every joint in my body. The rigid body and the treatment. He found, as he had expected, based on my gait and posture, that I was physically as inflexible as a much older man. He was especially concerned about two areas, my neck and chest. My neck was a problem because the rigid tilt of my head, aside from causing headaches, demanded compensatory adjustments elsewhere in my body. My chest was a concern because what he found there seriously impaired my respiration, so vital to general health. While each rib hinges on the spine and should be freely mobile, mine had become nearly immobilized by stiffness in those joints. In addition, he could find little evidence that I was using my diaphragm during respiration. As a consequence, Dr. Chase said my chest had to be lifted and dropped with each breath, like an orange crate, instead of having the ribs alternately drawing apart and together, like the folds in an accordion. For me, the simple act of breathing had become so labored and inefficient, and my lungs were so poorly ventilated, that these two reasons alone could account for my lagging energies. Dr. Chase and I agreed that I would make weekly visits to the clinic. During each 30-minute visit, Dr. Chase would apply manipulative procedures designed to gradually restore freedom of motion in every part of my musculoskeletal system, including the neck and rib cage. During the first few visits, he also introduced me to the concept of personal responsibility for my health by teaching me additional exercises to be done at home as a way to augment and sustain the therapeutic effects of the treatments. These included stretching and bending exercises for flexibility and abdominal breathing exercises to enhance my diaphragm's respiratory role. The frequency of my treatment sessions would be reduced as we made progress, but he prepared me to expect that treatments would need to continue for some time. My own responsibility for my health would continue for the rest of my life. The bodily transformation. As the course of treatments continued, first at weekly and then monthly intervals, and as ease of motion improved, I found myself enjoying moving for the first time. I began to walk between my home and the college, a round trip of 3 miles, and often twice a day when I returned to the lab in the evening or had lunch at home. A nightly walk with the family dog also became part of my newly pleasurable routine. I recall 2 evening walks with special poignancy. The first came after only a few weeks of treatment and home exercises, when my neck had become more flexible and more nearly erect. As I walked, I discovered with some alarm that the positioning of my head was no longer automatic. I found myself consciously trying to align my eyes with horizontal structures in my line of vision. Apparently, the reflexes that controlled the orientation of my head had been so long attuned to the tilt as the neutral position that they couldn't take over until they were appropriately reset. As I recall, it was not until the following evening that I could, with some confidence, delegate responsibility once again to my reflexes. The second incident came a few weeks later on another evening walk. I had been walking more briskly than usual and felt the need to take a deeper breath. As I was experiencing none of the accustomed resistance, I took what must have been the very first full breath of my entire life. Aside from the momentary pain as parts of my lungs opened and filled in unaccustomed ways, the immediate emotional release was unexpected and enormous. I leaned against a tree and sobbed with total abandon for what seemed a long time. Then I walked home in utter peace. I believe I have been breathing slowly, deeply, and easily from that moment on. In retrospect, this was the beginning of a continuing transformation, both mental and physical. Shortly after, my walking became brisker and longer. Then the impulse came to break into a run during my evening walks, just because it felt good. Running alternately with walking became a part of my daily pleasure. After taking up jogging, which in those days was still an unfamiliar term and activity, I asked Dr. Chase, who was an accomplished athlete, why he had never suggested exercise, other than the flexibility exercises, to me. His answer was simple. In order for there to be motion, there must be freedom of motion. I knew that you would respond when you were ready. Having become much freer, motion had indeed come spontaneously and easily, bringing with it much pleasure and other welcome changes. With my growing ease of motion came unprecedented body awareness. I seemed to sense what was good for me and what was not. With my wife's eager cooperation and the recommendations of my clinical colleagues, we changed to a much more healthy diet. Having unconsciously made a commitment to my health, I also gave up tobacco after many years of pipe smoking. Introduction to a New Way of Life. No less important, and perhaps in the long run even more important than Dr. Chase's skilled treatments, were his patient explanations of the concepts that guided osteopathic practice. By relating those principles to my own care, he taught them to me in a deeply personal manner. This in turn led me to begin an independent and deeper study of the concepts. I found their origins in ancient history and in many cultures. And then the footnote here is for Rene McGovern and her husband's book titled Your Healer Within, a Unified Field Theory for Healthcare. A Unified Field Theory for Healthcare. It's actually quite good. All right. Through research and study, I investigated the body structure and processes that underlie the principles, as well as the ways to apply them to improve my own health and that of my family. I found the principles not only scientifically sound, as I shall explain, but also poetically beautiful. Thanks to my fascination with this new, for me, philosophy, our course in physiology at the medical college was also transformed. I became aware, as director of the course, that it no longer sufficed to teach how the average heart, for example, functioned. It was our obligation as teachers of physicians to also teach the ways in which each organ and organ system served the person, and how the quality of function was influenced by the kind of person and the kind of life. We therefore sought to teach physiology in the context of human life, human diversity, and human frailty. Transformation of the person. I adopted the osteopathic philosophy, a new yet ancient way of interpreting natural law, as a way of life. This commitment hastened and deepened the transformation that had begun at the physical level and started to influence other aspects of my being. Flexibility of body seemed to invite and facilitate a comparable and welcome flexibility and openness of mind. With my newfound energies, my interests and activities began to rapidly extend beyond home, the classroom, and the laboratory, and into the community. I delved into areas outside my own discipline, such as other sciences, the arts, and the humanities. I found in myself not only a new, non-judgmental tolerance, but also an appreciation and a love of my colleagues and my students. Anger and resentments seemed to dissolve. I became a more relaxed and effective teacher, researcher, and scholar. My life became a continual quest for new challenges of body and mind, as well as new opportunities for growth. At the age of 46, I earned a private pilot's license to fly single-engine aircraft. At the age of 50, I took up tennis. I enjoy participating in a variety of sports, to which I added cross-country skiing following a move to Colorado. As my health and outlook improved, changes in attitude toward my work also occurred quite spontaneously. Having always lived and worked with a sense of urgency, I became aware at some point in my 60s that I was living with a pervading feeling of timelessness and unhurriedness. My work, like my leisure, had become a source of gratification rather than a compulsion or a drive for recognition. Happily, I continued to live with the disquieting and tantalizing feeling that I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, as though some work opportunity is waiting for me that will be even more fulfilling. At the age of 84, I became aware that the quest had changed to, what is the best use of me at this stage of my life? I explored a variety of alternatives. I continued in medical education until 1989, when at the age of 80 I retired as Professor Emeritus from the North Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in Fort Worth, Texas. I remained fully engaged, however, as an author, a visiting lecturer, and a participant in professional conferences in the United States and abroad, in organizational work, and in a variety of volunteer services in my community. An amusing incident during a very tragic time in my life eloquently symbolizes my transformation. In my late 60s, and soon after the death of my first wife, I found myself burdened with the premiums of 4 unnecessary life insurance policies. I had taken them out almost 30 years earlier in anticipation of an early death, and several years after discovering that I could have happier options if I assumed responsibility for my own health. I asked a local agent to advise me regarding the appropriate disposition of the policies. On examining them, he said with a hint of a smile, "Gee, doctor, that's too bad." "What's too bad?" I asked. "You obviously bet on an early death," he responded, "and you lost." The secret. What then is the secret of my good fortune? What are the factors responsible for my new joy of living and the forgotten expectation of illness and early death? Almost certainly, the factor that initiated the change was the enormous improvement of bodily flexibility, the freedom of motion and of breath that I experienced as a result of my osteopathic treatments with Dr. Chase. I am convinced, however, that the sustaining factors have been 1. My deliberate commitment to health, 2. Assuming personal responsibility for my health in conjunction with osteopathic care, and 3. Applying my elaborations of the new principles to my life. I learned that these principles were much more than a guide to clinical practice. I found them to be a valuable guide to the teaching of medical physiology. They also raised new kinds of questions for research. In addition, I discovered that the same principles could be a guide to healthful and joyful living. I chose to adopt these principles as my way of life, and subsequently learned that health is a way of life. While these principles are identified here as osteopathic principles, their roots are in antiquity and in many cultures. Again, Rene McGovern's other book, Unified Health Theory. What is it called? Your Healer Within, a Unified Field Theory for Healthcare. That's the reference for that statement. That osteopathic principles have their roots in antiquity and are also found in many other cultures. It is to the credit of A.T. Still, the founder of the osteopathic medical profession, that he adopted and enriched these tenets. Further, the osteopathic profession continues to develop highly effective methods for implementing them. It has based a system of practice upon these principles that also incorporates all of modern medical technology. In addition, osteopathic physicians continue to test and develop osteopathic principles through research. While the origin of these principles was entirely empirical, they are the synthesis of clinical experience and observation extending over centuries. Beginning in 1945, my research in the laboratory and in the library has been devoted to seeking knowledge and understanding of the biological processes and mechanisms in the human being that account for these clinical experiences and observations. As a result, both I and the professional readers of my research publications have a growing comprehension of the scientific foundations of osteopathic principles. Having lived by those same osteopathic tenets for over 40 years and richly profited from that long experience, I have learned that they compose a healthful way of thinking, behaving, being, and becoming. Others who have made a commitment to their health and assumed responsibility for it have found these guiding principles as rewarding and transforming as I have, even when adopted late in life. So that you, too, may have the opportunity to live joyfully in the later years of your life, I intend to offer my personal interpretations and elaborations of these guiding principles in Part 2. In Part 3, I will attempt to dismantle unnecessary barriers and challenge the origins of human vulnerability. Finally, in Part 4, I will walk you through ways of creating your own well-being until you too break into a run along the path of wellness and healthy aging. So wasn't that wonderful? Isn't that inspiring? I just love it. I love it. And here are a few of Dr. Korr's wonderful little quotes that are put at the start of the other little sections of the book. The more I choose to live in accordance with the laws of nature, the more I can expect to die young when I am very old. The more whole I become, the better my parts operate. Enlightenment comes on its own and unexpectedly when I cease to pursue it. The sharper my view of now, the further I can see ahead. The more nearly a time runs out, the less hurried I am. The more I choose to be bound by the laws of nature, the freer I become. Having accepted and even welcomed my mortality, my quest for completion presents me with new beginnings. What a beautiful way to feel in your 80s, no? The more I learn, the less I have to remember. The less the need to remember, the larger the space for learning. I want to read that one again. The more I learn, the less I have to remember. The less the need to remember, the larger the space for learning. The less certain I become about what is right and wrong, virtuous or evil, good or bad for others, the more certain I become about what is right for me. Having lived according to the laws of nature, I can expect to die young, when I am very old. The less distinct the boundary between me and the rest of the universe, the more distinct is my identity. These are all from Dr. Korr. Obviously, he had a wonderful evolution in the course of his existence. So I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did.